Before we start this, just know I make some mistakes in this video, which is a massive reason why I did decide to finish it, even though my mind was telling me no. My body was telling me yes. Maybe you can learn a thing or two from my missteps, or at the very least you can laugh at my misfortune. Anyhow, double exposures. Double exposures are a fun technique in which two images are layered together or exposed on one single frame to create a surreal blended effect. Popular for images that tell a story, convey a mood, or just present the world in a unique, imaginative way. And in my opinion, it has three major focus points: storytelling, surrealism, and visual contrast. The technique is very versatile and can be used to convey subtle or powerful messages depending on the context, but we're gonna take it to Disneyland. I've been slowly chipping away at a bigger project at Disneyland that I've been working on for the past 7 months, and in that exploration, I thought it might be fun to try something a little different for me, something I haven't really done since high school with cameras, and that's where the double exposure comes in. So if you've never shot a double exposure on film, let's just kind of go into the basics for a hot second. You'll need a 35mm camera that lets you control the multiple exposure settings. Look for cameras with a manual advance, or maybe even one that has a double exposure button. This is the easiest technique for new shooters. Double exposures do work best when you think about both of the images in advance. Generally, you want one image to be the base or the background, which is often a simple texture or a landscape. The second image is usually the focal subject, like a person or an object or something that'll just pop against the background. Once you've taken your first shot, it's time for the overlapping image, whatever that be. On many cameras, this does involve holding down the rewind button, so when you advance, it's not actually moving your film forward and it keeps that frame. But some cameras do have a multifunction button that allows you to just take another shot. Now position your second shot in the way that you see fit, press the shutter again, and bam, you just trick Kodak out of more of your money. Not a lot, but some. However, in today's video, I thought we'd try something even more simple than this general rule of thumb by using my Canon EOS Kiss. This camera and other automatic winding cameras of this era do exactly just that. You put in your roll and it auto winds all the way to the end of your spool. It's not just X-Pans that do that. So instead of shooting each double exposure one by one, I shot through the roll entirely, used a film leader, yanked out the negative, and reshot through the roll again. And you can do this on the manual cameras too, because sometimes you don't know what your double exposure is going to be. But just to be safe, I marked my frame lines when loading the camera. That way when I reload that roll for its second go through the lens, I have my frame lines lined up, and as I advance the film forward, every shot should line up perfectly. There shouldn't be this sort of like overlap in your negatives, because you definitely don't want to reload your film and have that double exposure half on your image and half on the next image. Your lab will have no idea what to scan. But like I said before, it is better to have your double exposures thought out ahead of time. But with the uncertainty of an amusement park, I knew I needed a slightly different form of attack to have a successful walk and have a good time doing it, and most of all walk away with some pretty interesting images. Disneyland is famous for its theming, rides, and delicious foods, but something that has always interested me is their choice in horticulture. The edible fruits around the park that they incorporate into their dishes, the vegetables, the herbs, the flowers. I guess that's the part of my dad and me that has always found that really interesting and a beautiful piece of the park, and I wanted to capture that in a way that celebrated those things. Disneyland has roughly 5,000 trees, 70 different thousand flowers, and over 25 types of grass.
You hear my phone ring?
So for this experiment, I took a roll of Color Plus, mostly because it's a cheaper stock, but also I just have too much of it, and I loaded it with the intention of capturing flowers first around the park, and to overlay and double expose that with landmarks or other interesting moments that you would recognize from the parks. So let's take a look at what worked and what didn't. Let's just remember here that I said I made a few mistakes, but at the same time, there are some successes here as well. So like I said, for the most part, I focused on different flowers around the park. And looking at this first shot, I think that I could have gotten a lot closer, and something that I did learn later on as I was going through. With an image like this, you've got the big Pirates of the Caribbean mast of the ride right in the background, spurling through all these flowers, and then on the bottom corner, there's a group of people gathering. It looks too much like images that are the same distance away, and it doesn't really add anything to each other. It looks like a mistake, honestly. Now see, this one's kind of cool because there's so much empty space of the boat being filled up by these flowers that I am now a little bit closer to. You can also tell that there's a different depth of focus here. One subject is really far away and is clearly the main subject of the photo, while the flowers are really close, really bokeh up. Some of them are in focus while others are a little pulled away, and it gives this almost vignette around the ship that's pretty cool. I think the orange flowers on the border don't really add very much. It's cool to see the contrast of color, but I think it just doesn't look as neat because those are there. Okay, so Obviously, I love Halloween, and I don't know what it is about Halloween decorations, but they are going so fast. We are just into Christmas already. By the time this video comes out, we'll already be in Valentine's Day, I swear to God. So I don't think that this one is as successful. There's some cool stuff about it, but I was really focusing on the foliage of these Main Street designs, just because I thought that that would be interesting texture. But I think I could have actually picked a better subject than that Tomorrowland spire, because it just looks like I'm stabbing Mickey in the face. It's not a terrible idea, but I think you can look at this photo and see how much negative space there is, and I could have filled that with other things. This is probably one of the most successful ones. I think it's a little hot. Something that I didn't mention before with double exposures is you do want to almost expose each shot either a half or a whole step underexposed than what you would normally shoot the roll at. That way you're not overcooking your film with light. And I think this image, even though it's super cool, you know, you've got the parade, you've got Mickey, you've got Minnie, you've got this whole band, and then you've got the castle as a center point. And then for whatever reason, just the amount of flower exposure sort of like dips away with the parade. So you're like it perfectly frames that area and then kind of gives the crowd around on the main street the flowers to sort of dance away in your mind. And it just helps bring everything to the center, which is cool, but like I said, a little overexposed. Same idea, not as successful. You know, for whatever reason, these pink redder flowers are just taking a lot more of the spotlight, and it's taking away from the moment, and it's a little overexposed. Now, this shot I think is actually kind of a perfect example of a texture using to just give this an extra little bump. This picture of Mickey is not anything that you couldn't do normally in an app or digitally, but what I like about this is that it's not a very distracting double exposure. It's just kind of fun, and it brings a little bit of energy and color pop to everything. Now with this one, it's a little weird for sure. I can definitely tell that during the day at moments I wasn't remembering that I was shooting flowers first and then shooting subjects. So this is a perfect example of planning it out. You know, I think the most interesting thing about this shot is that I happen to get Space Mountain in both images, which is so like, I don't know, what are the odds of that I happen to be in line for Space Mountain for one shot, and then later on in the day, hours later, I decide to look that way and get that image as the background. Like, it's such a cool accident to me, but it's not exactly what I was trying to do here. Now, this one is so close to being a cool picture. It's not a cool picture, but it's close. There's some ideas there, but I think the problem with it is that I didn't focus enough. I think with making double exposures like this, you gotta take notes literally for every frame, so you know, were the flowers or the texture that I took pictures of, was it really hot? Was there a lot of lighting, or was it kind of in the shadows? Is it gonna give more of a negative space? And this is a perfect example of two images that are both very well lit not working together because there's no contrast. There's no place for one image to stand out more than the other, and they kind of just get lost together. Sucks a little bit because the queen was posing for me. I had that moment, and I don't think I nailed it, unfortunately. And this one's even worse. She boy band me. She gave me another option, you know, but it just doesn't work because of how hot everything is. Now you can see that in the middle here, like maybe you could take notes on this if you wanted to. You can actually see some out of focus people in the background behind the queen. So there were windows of space of light that weren't as exposed as others. And if you were kind of, I don't know how you would be able to specifically pick such a tiny point, but if I had put her face there, maybe this image would have worked. Maybe it still wouldn't have worked that well. But that's the option, and that's sort of like the solve for this idea. The biggest thing you're trying to create with a double exposure is contrast, and this just doesn't have that. Now see, even though this one is not super contrasty, it still works for me. There's enough of a familiarity with the castle, and these flowers are a little more underexposed. I do think I kind of figured that out later on in the day to expose a little bit darker. That these flowers create just sort of like a texture that almost like falls away when it comes to the sky, and it just like fills up the castle. So it's almost this really cool idea of the castle is built of flowers. This one works okay. The carousel, I feel like I'm actually a little too close to the carousel, and then the flowers are really close, so the subjects are almost clashing with what the focus is. So another thing to sort of keep in mind. This one is very surreal, and it's such an accident, you know. This is the redhead character from that Pixar movie that I can't remember, Scottish redhead, the movie. And the only reason why I kind of like this photo is because this flower looks like it's almost coming out of her mouth, which is almost like horror movie-ish. I don't know, it's super interesting and surreal to me. I think the people in the background are a bit distracting, but how are you going to get away from that at a place like Disneyland? This is definitely one of my favorite shots in the roll. And the reason why I think it works is because the sort of subject photo is very dark, or it just doesn't have a lot of light highlights. It's very backlit, and the subject, there's so many shadows on that part that allows the double exposure of the flowers to sort of creep through in places, and it just happens to perfectly frame this little boy for the sake of this story. It feels like he's looking at the castle for the first time. There's a wonderment in his eyes that's really cool, and then you've got just these poppies or whatever the orange flowers are just sort of creeping through and distracting every other, like there's so many other people in this shot, but the flowers are perfectly kind of erasing them, allowing our focus to go just to this boy and how excited he looks. So definitely one of my favorite ones in the roll. Again, so I said I did forget at times when I was taking flower pictures and when I was taking subject pictures on the roll, and I think the funny thing to include about this shot is that it's stormtroopers overlaid with a marching band, and the weird contrast of like both those things kind of contrasting and clashing together. One is so happy and silly, and the other is the Empire and death and evil. I don't know, it's just funny, but it kind of works. It's not what I was trying to do with this roll, but it kind of works. This one's fine, little holly over the band. This is a perfect example of showing when shadow kind of allows you to let something pop. And just the lighting on that holly berry is really all that was being lit up by the texture shot. So that's the only thing coming through, while the rest of the bush kind of just fades away into this texture that's not really overpowering the rest of the image. This one's terrifying. I don't know why I'm including it, but it just shows your double exposures can tell a story you're not trying to tell. I think the first shot was over in California Adventure. Maybe it was the second shot. I'm not sure. There's that sort of grizzly bear redwood adventure park. And, you know, kids are climbing. There's a bunch of rope stuff. I just kind of was seeing this little pocket of light on this one bridge that people were running through. And I took one shot thinking that, oh, that's a great shot. And I didn't really think about, oh, I'm double exposing this shot. And you can see when I took the second image of the Mark Twain chopping through the water, it kind of accidentally looks like the fins are chopping up this child. It's so terrible. That's why I'm showing it. This is probably the second most successful image on the roll. The big thing that works for me here is there's not a lot of contrast in either shot, except for the colors. So this flower is white, giving like a very different exposure than a lot of the other flowers. And the second image of Cars Land is really backlit, so it allows that to sort of seep through, and it gives this weird almost chemical stained look that I really love. Like, it kind of looks like the flowers are bleached onto this image. And between that and the kid being lifted through the castle, these are the two most successful shots. I think there's a couple other cool ones, but this one definitely stands out as something that looks like I knew what I was doing. The best part about shooting double exposures is their unexpected nature. It can be extremely rewarding, or at the very least, educational for your next attempt. I think a lot of these shots turned out great, but on my next try, I'd really like to enjoy a better ratio of decent results. So maybe planning ahead is the right move. If you like this video, please, I know that this is silly to say, but give it a like, subscribe, help me fight against the overlords of the algorithm. And we'll see you next time when I triple expose your mom. Jesus, that was aggressive. Don't do that.